Hey everyone, welcome back to the Geography Facts channel. Today we're diving into a fascinating topic: why 95% of Australia is empty. You might be surprised to learn that sixth largest country in the world, Australia has vast stretches of land that are almost completely uninhabited. We'll break down why this is the case, compare it to the United States, and explore what makes Australia's population distribution. If you love learning about geography and global comparisons, stick around and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Australia, an overview of its geography and population. Before we jump into why so much of Australia is empty, let's start with geography of giant Australia. Australia is a massive country with a land area of around 7.7 million square kilometers. That makes it nearly the same size as the continental United States, which spans around 10 million square kilometers. However, here's where things get interesting. Australia has a population of just 26 million people, while the United States has over 335 million. This means that Australia's population density is about 3 people per square kilometer, while the US averages around 36 people per square kilometer. That's 12 times higher than United States. Most Australians live along the eastern and southeastern coasts, with vast interior regions known as the Outback remaining sparsely populated or completely uninhabited. But why is this the case? To understand, let's take a closer look at Australia's most populated areas, how they compare to the US, and why the rest of the country remains so empty. The most populated areas of Australia. 1. Sydney, New South Wales. Sydney is Australia's largest city. Population of New South Wales area is around 5.3 million people. It's often compared to major US cities like Los Angeles, which has a population of about 3.9 million in the city proper, but over 13 million in its greater metropolitan area. Sydney is known for its iconic landmarks like the Sydney Opera House and Harbour Bridge, and it's a hub for finance, culture, and tourism. However, unlike Los Angeles, which has sprawling suburbs extending into the desert, Sydney is more contained due to its location on the coast and surrounding natural reserves. The city's growth is limited by the Blue Mountains to the west and the Pacific Ocean to the east. This results in higher population density in the city center, with limited expansion into the less hospitable inland areas. 2. Melbourne, Victoria. Next on the list is Melbourne, home to around 5 million people with a lot of immigrants. Often compared to New York City in terms of cultural diversity, arts, and lifestyle, Melbourne has a vibrant urban core. However, its population density is far lower than New York's, mainly because the city spreads out across the relatively flat plains of Victoria. Unlike Sydney, Melbourne has fewer natural barriers, allowing for suburban sprawl. But beyond its metropolitan borders, the population drops dramatically. Once you leave the urbanized coastal area, you quickly find yourself in sparsely populated farmlands or bushland. 3. Brisbane, Queensland. Brisbane, with about 2.6 million residents, is the third largest city in Australia. It's comparable to cities like Chicago, which has around 2.7 million people. However, while Chicago is surrounded by the densely populated Midwest, Brisbane quickly gives way to less populated areas as you move inland. The city's subtropical climate attracts people looking for a warmer lifestyle, but the vast outback to the west remains largely empty. 4. Perth, Western Australia. Perth is an isolated city on the western coast with around 2.1 million people. If you're looking for a US comparison, it's somewhat like San Diego, but with far fewer surrounding cities. Once you leave Perth, the landscape becomes incredibly sparse almost immediately. The nearest major city, Adelaide, is over 2,000 kilometers, 1,200 miles away, which is roughly the distance from Los Angeles to Denver. This isolation is a key reason why Western Australia remains largely uninhabited. 5. Adelaide, South Australia. Finally, Adelaide has about 1.4 million residents and is known for its festivals, wine regions, and laid-back lifestyle. It's comparable in size to San Antonio, Texas, which has 1.5 million people. However, unlike Texas, which has numerous surrounding cities, Adelaide is surrounded by vast arid land. Beyond its suburban areas, South Australia is dominated by dry deserts and salt lakes. The vast empty areas, the Australian Outback. Now that we've covered the populated regions, let's move to the other side. The vast areas of Australia that are almost completely empty. The Outback. The Outback refers to the vast, remote interior of Australia, which covers most of the continent. It's a region defined by its harsh climate, sparse vegetation, and extreme isolation. To put things into perspective, the Outback is so large that it can fit Texas, California, and Montana within its borders and still have room left over. Most of the Outback receives less than 10 inches of rain per year. That's why people classifying it as a desert. This makes it similar to areas like Nevada or Arizona in the United States, but on a much larger scale. However, unlike the southwestern United States, which has cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix thriving in the desert, Australia's Outback has no equivalent. Towns like Alice Springs, with a population of about 25,000, are few and far between. Why is 95% of Australia so empty? So, why do few people live in Australia's populated area? Here are some key reasons. 1. Harsh climate and limited water supply. Australia is the driest inhabited continent in the world, with 70% of its land classified as arid or semi-arid. This means that, unlike the United States, which has large, fertile regions like the Midwest and Southeast, much of Australia is simply too dry for large-scale agriculture or urban development. To compare, while the U.S. has vast river systems like the Mississippi and Colorado rivers that provide water for millions. Australia's longest river system, the Murray-Darling Basin, is much smaller. This limited water supply makes it challenging to sustain large populations outside the coastal areas in Australia. 2. Poor soil quality. Much of Australia's soil is nutrient poor, especially in the Outback. The United States, in contrast, has vast areas of fertile soil, such as the Great Plains, which support large-scale farming. In Australia, however, the lack of fertile soil means that agriculture is concentrated in a few areas like the Murray-Darling Basin, while much of the interior remains uninhabitable. 3. Isolation and lack of infrastructure. The interior of Australia is incredibly remote, with few roads, railways, or other forms of infrastructure. For example, while the United States has an extensive highway system that connects even its most remote regions, Australia's highways are mostly concentrated along the coast. As the example, the Stuart Highway, which runs through the center of the continent, is one of the few major roads crossing the Outback, but even this is sparsely traveled. This isolation means that even if people wanted to move to the interior, the lack of infrastructure and access to services like healthcare and education would be a significant barrier. 4. Historical settlement patterns. Australia's colonial history also played a role in its population distribution. When Europeans first arrived, they settled along the coasts where there was access to ports, fresh water, and more stable climates. The harsh interior was largely avoided, and this pattern has continued to the present day. By contrast, the United States had fertile land stretching westward, encouraging settlers to move inland and establish towns across the continent. The availability of arable land and the expansion of the railroad system in the 19th century led to a much more even population distribution. 5. Cultural and economic factors. Lastly, there are cultural and economic reasons for Australia's population distribution. Australia has a highly urbanized population, with over 85% of people living in cities. In comparison, only about 83% of Americans live in urban areas, with a significant portion living in medium-sized towns and rural areas. Australia's economy is heavily dependent on sectors like mining, tourism, and finance, which are concentrated in specific areas rather than being spread out. In contrast, the US has a more diversified economy with industries like manufacturing, agriculture, and tech spread across multiple regions, encouraging more even population distribution. So, there you have it. While Australia is a massive country, its unique geography, climate, and history have resulted in 95% of its land being almost completely empty, from the coastal cities that thrive to the harsh outback that remains untouched. Australia's population distribution is truly one of a kind. Curious about more geography and global comparisons? Check out our other videos, and let us know in the comments what topic you'd like us to cover next. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.